Ryan, I have a few questions for you today. Um, I wanted to just briefly talk about your experience as a musician, as a composer. I understand that you are a part of the electro acoustic music scene. Tell us a little bit about being a part of that community and what's that been like for you?
Well, that's like in Chicago, that's a lot of different types of communities. There um, electronic music kind of has different facets. There's the kind of the EDM and house music world, which I've not been as much a part of that world in Chicago. In fact, when I lived in Minneapolis when I was a kid and the house music scene was really exploding, I wasn't even allowed to come down here, so I couldn't partake in it. But I actually, my background is as a classical composer, and I thought I was just going to do acoustic music my whole life and do orchestra pieces. And then somewhere along the way, I got really interested in certain orchestrational techniques that led me to realize there were limitations to what an orchestra could actually do. So I started exploring electronic sound to try to figure out how I could like make one thing sound like it was literally playing another thing. Like the color of a string section, but the sound of a gong or a drum or something like that. That was my gateway or window into the whole thing, and that got me then through producing my own music and concerts of my own music and helping other people produce concerts. Engaging in the community. It kind of led me to a career as a sound engineer in the new music world. And doing that, I've done tons of live concerts and then specific sound designs for very kind of theatrical things. Um, but mostly with a music centered focus. A lot of sound designers in theater work just in theater. I tend to work more from the music side, and occasionally that means we're doing a fully staged production of something, whether it be a piece of music that has some stage elements to it, or whether it be an opera or a musical or whatever. um, and then also producing my own music and recording improvised music. So like the electronic music scene, there's kind of the electronic music scene that's kind of embedded into the Chicago new music scene. There's also the electronic music scene that's very much more like the drone and improvised noise music scene. There's the scene that's more associated with like the free jazz scene in Chicago. So there's all sorts of different scenes of electronic music, and I tend to be kind of a little bit on the fringe of all of them, with the exception maybe the house music scene. But I've even started to really get to be friends with some of the house music people, and I've found those relationships to be really fruitful. I even for a project I'm doing now, a little sound installation I'm doing, a little part of it is like a house music section, and so I decided to just start making house music tracks. So I've been actually, that's the beauty of electronic music, is there's so many different directions you can go in, musically and genre wise. But you have to kind of have the fundamental musical chops to kind of engage in all those different scenes. So and that's what I try to emphasize in my teaching too, that like, you have to, it's really about having the musical chops. It's less about knowing where all the cool buttons are. So
I've seen some of your work through like Vimeo and just doing a little bit of research. And you performed at Krakow, Poland. What has been your favorite venue as far as sound, the way your music sounds? What has been, in all of your performance around the world, what has been your favorite venue?
So yeah, in Krakow, Poland, we actually did the premiere of one of my bigger operas, Three Singers, which I did in collaboration with choreographer Erica Mott, Canadian vocalist Fides Kruker, and then the three actual performers, Jenna Lyle, Katie Mazzini, and Hope Litwin. Jenna Lyle is a composer in Chicago and a really dear friend of mine, as are all of them actually now. Katie Mazzini, who's in Walkabout Theater, and Hope Litwin now lives in New York. At the time, she was executive director of Cuba Ensemble, which was like kind of a new performance troupe. in town, and we got the opportunity to actually premiere it in Poland. It was actually commissioned by Ingenuity Festival in Cleveland, but one of the partners was Krikoteka in Poland, and that the Krikoteka is the Tadeusz Kantor Museum. And I got to say, I actually, my electronic music career really started in Poland. I studied from 2000 to 2001 on a Fulbright scholarship, and that's where I finally decided to jump into the deep end of electronic music, because I just found such an amazing community there of people who were doing such innovative things. And at the time, there was nothing there. There was a studio that my professor had hobbled together because he was best friends with Richard Boulanger, who taught at MIT and would come and visit. And every time he came to visit, he'd bring a really expensive piece of gear they weren't using anymore with him as a present. And so his whole studio was actually old MIT gear. And so that's where I learned really where I learned electronic music was in Poland on a bunch of like gear that was like about 4 years out of date,
Are we talking like keyboards? Or are we talking like synthesizers?
Oh, we're talking about keyboards, like digital mixers. He had a Pro Tools rig in one of the studios that was, with the full, digi mixer and everything. So that's kind of, and that was like a surround studio where I did a lot of surround pieces. But the difference between that time and now, Three Singers was premiered in 2014, and we were just working in this beautiful, fully equipped black box theater. When I said I need 8 speakers hung from the ceiling and eight on the floor and 2 subwoofers, they were like, no problem, and they hired a crew to do it. Arts funding in Poland is very amazing. They spent a good portion of their EU money on arts funding. So I would say that that's been one of the most pleasant experiences I've had. But I've also, like, even in Poland, performed just improvised duo music in, like, seedy basement, smoke-filled basement bars, and I really enjoyed that. One thing I will talk about in Chicago, I was able to, a few years ago, do a project called The Sound Room, which is probably somewhere on my website too, with composers Kyle Vector and Dan DeHaan. And the 3 of us basically equipped the old High Concept Laboratory, which the new one's at Mana Contemporary, but the old one was in a space really near the Hideout. And on the outside was this brick building, but on the inside it was like an A-frame log cabin. And so we created we called it was like a 14.2. So 14 surround speakers, a ring of speakers on the floor, a ring on the ceiling, and then a couple at the top of the A-frame to create kind of a ambisonic dome. And we did live performances in there where I invited improvising musicians to come, and they just stuck mics in front of them and did stuff with their sound that went around the space. So that was a pretty magical thing, because it was just like so sonically perfect, the wooden paneling and stuff just made this beautiful reverberant sound, but not too reverberant. And then you could really hear the clarity of the sound moving. So I've done sound and sound design with people at, Zankel Hall in New York. It's part of Carnegie Hall. Really love working. I did shows at the MCA here and the Harris Theater. Harris Theater, it's like mixing live in a studio, so I kind of love working there when I get a chance. And then, of course, I've done a bunch of stuff at the J Pritzker Pavilion, which is the big Frank Gehry sculpture, where in 2011, I think it was, we mixed Steve Reich's music for 18 musicians in surround sound, like a live performance of it.
Wow.
And ever since then, I've periodically done stuff there, and I'm working on a sound installation right now that I'm hoping will go up there sometime in 2020. TBA.
TBA.
Everything's TBA right now.
And I think that we'll talk a little bit about how performance is adapting to technology, or how technology adapts to performance in a little bit. I also wanted to ask you about your recent project at the Bridge House Museum, and called Compartments. What was that exhibit?
That was a sound installation, and that it was a site-specific installation for the Bridge House Museum. The Bridge House Museum is this museum in the in one of the towers on the Chicago River bridge, the Disabled Bridge, that on Michigan Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a 5-story kind of tower and each room I put a separate speaker in each room, and each speaker had a little bit different sound coming through it. And actually that was one material for one of the vignettes for this bigger installation I'm hoping to do at the Pritzker Pavilion soon. And that installation is going to be called "O'er the Body, Ere the Land." And so this is and it's going to be multiple vignettes based on on the one hand, you have recordings of water sounds and prominent water features in Chicago. So that particular one was a recording actually of a little piece of the Des Plaines River, where you could kind of put microphones next to rocks, and the rocks made these different kind of unique sonic little compartments. And so I called it compartments. So that vignette, so I basically turned that vignette into its own standalone installation. So that was at the Bridge House. Each room was a separate compartment of sound.
Oh wow!
But then I also used a vintage synth in Juno 106, which I have in my other room, to kind of convolve the sound of the water with the sound with synthetic sound. So eventually you hear something that has the shape of water, but the tonal quality of the synthesizer.
Now, I think this may be a good segue to talking about technology, from hardware to applications, software that musicians have been using maybe for the past 5 years and are becoming, a norm, especially now as we're going through, new exploration of technology. I wanted to ask of your, some of the tools that you are using now for your own instruction, as you're teaching students about, music, as you're teaching, just things that may that you find useful in your course.
Yeah, I mean, I teach in two pretty different ways. One is the technology class I teach at UIC is a very intro level to technology class, and we're just trying to the main function of the course is to make sure that our music majors and music business majors have a basic understanding or contact with technology. And so oftentimes I'm using what we have available to us. The campus has a lot of agreements with different software companies and not with others. In terms of digital audio workstation type softwares, DAWs or DAWs, as people call them, like Pro Tools or Logic Pro, or as we teach in our studio, Reaper. We don't have campus-wide agreements with a lot of the software companies, so pretty much we have to kind of just purchase them as a unit, and they can be very expensive. So we're working towards building up our software profile in the music lab. We actually do have a cohort over in art and design who does have a Pro Tools license because he teaches in moving image and some of the film courses. So we're talking with them too. But right now what we're teaching is a software called Reaper, which is a freeware. All students can download it for free. So that's kind of one of the beauties of it, is without too much headache, a student can just get it. And when I'm teaching that course, I'm really more trying to focus on universal concepts. So every kind of digital audio workstation has the same has things that are fairly similar. How do you play sound? How do you stop it? How do you record? How do you set it up so different tracks are recording and not others? Those things are fairly universal. So I try to use fairly generalized language and be pretty universal about it. And then I also try to get students to get in the habit of workflows, of certain types of workflows with with projects. So they're saving their work to cloud software like Box. We use Box because the university provides Box. Not all students are that happy about it when they first have to use it, but after they get used to it, it's it's fairly self-explanatory and easy to use. So,
Hmm.
you know, essentially it's trying to get them to develop habits. Like sometimes I feel like people think a technology course is just somebody showing you where all the cool stuff is and where all the magic buttons are, but it's actually a practice course, just like any other class. You have to practice physical coordination, like when you move a cursor around in Reaper, like how does it behave when it's in one place on the media file as opposed to another place. Like you kind of have to it has these different contextual behaviors, and when you learn it and really get them under your fingers, you can work very quickly. But until you develop that skill set or those motor skills, like you're kind of like fumbling around with it for a while. And so I like really just try to give them exercises that where they practice that, and then also hopefully along the way they understand certain concepts about the way sound works, the way gain structure works, the way things like compression and equalization work a little bit. So they just really understand more about um, audio production, while also being able to have like a common language. So then when we explore like more kind of like more abstract concepts that they haven't really been challenged with before, that they kind of have the basic language and tools to talk about it. The other way, I also teach more advanced courses like Max MSP, but I don't really do it at UIC. I have some private students in Urbana-Champaign, where I'm a grad student myself, doing a PhD in informatics. And for those students, we're talking more about things like Max MSP, a little bit more about Ableton and those kind of more advanced softwares, and then more about like networking. How do you send data back and forth between different programs to get them to talk to each other and do crazy cool things together?
When talking about like habits, what are some of the habits that students catch on to really quickly as they're learning about like these different DAW systems?
That's a good question. I kind of feel like, if I for instance had a program like Logic Pro in the studio, which we don't have yet, and I've been thinking about trying to get, it's a budget concern, but I think they would have a much quicker time of getting from point A to point B, like developing the habits, because it's more designed. It's designed to be a bit more user friendly, and it's more of an entry level program. And so I do think, self-admittedly, my students have a little bit harder time developing those initial, um, those initial habits, those initial good habits and best practices.
Hmm.
But I just I I think they have an easy time, once they understand where all the things actually are, and mostly once they understand in their hands how the contextual menus work. So like if a cursor, hard to talk about if I can't show it, but if you put a cursor at the end of a little media item and it turns into a thing that lets you drag the end of the media item back and forth, once they understand where that happens and they sort of get used to it, then they kind of understand, then they can kind of work much more quickly. So I actually think a lot of the things, and I kind of come in with this expectation that's going to take them a while to like get over that hump. But
Yeah.
it would take them a while to get over that hump in any program, uh, but once they are over that hump, that's where I tend to spend the first half of the semester kind of like trying to get them over that hump and just allowing them the time and space to struggle with it. And then the second half of the semester, I hope from there we can like kind of do things that are much more fun for them, and engage their creativity a little more.
And start applying some of those things that they've struggled with along with something they're working on. I
Yeah.
and I find myself in the same boat with just like teaching myself using like, for example, Ableton was something that I started with, which was in retrospect is a super difficult or very complex DAW in my opinion, because there's like the
Yeah.
performance view and then there's workstation.
Yeah.
And it took me probably, I still don't know what half those half those
Yeah.
applications do. And but to teach it to someone else is it's another skill. It's another huge. You got to have a lot of patience for it, and that's something you're doing in the day to day, especially now. And that's
Yeah.
that's that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, it's all about managing the expectation of what you're expecting them to achieve, and it's also about a lot about like just letting them know that it's okay if their project they're making during week 2 of the class isn't a masterpiece. Just contextualizing that like the first thing I wrote wasn't a masterpiece. Like when I was writing acoustic music, and how much of what a composer, sometimes it takes composers 8 or 9 years of training and trying out different styles before they like find their voice. So this is, people are like, when are you going to show me the cool stuff? And I'm like, the cool stuff is up here. Like I'm going to show you how to release that cool stuff. Like that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm never going to, if it was all about just buying a particular plugin that made all the great music happen, then what do you have to do with it then? Is that really yours? Like, but if you, through your own creativity and knowing where you want to go, then can figure out, oh, this is what I need to make this happen. That's, I think, the most important part. The
Yeah.
important thing. So I do try to, I spend the first half of the semester on tools, and then the second half I try to contextualize and give a little more history and a little more, just get them listening and opening up their ears a little bit. And in this situation, it's all going to be about opening up the ears. We're
Yeah.
gonna do a lot.
Great. And I think it might be, sometimes I think it might be like a bit of a challenge, but it's also exciting to explore new creative solutions to to technology. I wanted to bring up you're also working with a lot of faculty now with technology, and a lot of it is figuring out that figuring out working remotely. What does that mean
Yeah.
with music? Well, yeah, what does that mean with music working remotely?
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, right now we're in sort of like a get it done real quick kind of solution. I mean, the School of Theater and Music has a few online courses that were made prior to this whole emergency situation. And those, I mean, literally, the staff at CATA, 3 people spent probably each, hundreds of hours on each of those online courses to make them very slick, shooting things on location and doing all sorts of editing and getting the lighting just right and using green screens. And I mean, it was a very elaborate production, and those courses are very successful and they look very good. Um, and, and it's not just about how things look and how videos are shot. It's oftentimes about the way it's organized and the way you interact, how much face time you have versus how much asynchronous time you have, where you just have videos for them to watch and then assignments for them to do at their own pace. So those things take a lot of planning and a lot of thinking through. We're kind of having to get it through it really fast, and with the expectation that pretty much the entire world is going online right now. One challenge we're anticipating is that synchronous courses are going to be a little bit rougher than they might be in other ways. So we have really pushed for, when possible, doing things asynchronously, shooting videos in advance, uploading them so students can watch them at their own pace, and then maybe setting office hours, so or using live class times as ways to just kind of check in with individuals. But that's not always possible. There's theater classes that have live acting and things like that have to happen. So there's a lot of cases in which synchronous synchronous time will have to be used. And so, like, in those cases, I think there's going to be a lot of, and in fact, I'm looking forward to experimenting with this with my class, because we're talking about digital tools. So we're going to do an exercise where we just try to sing together. That the other day in the staff meeting, everybody's saying happy birthday together. And it was really funny. And we're all hearing that in a different way, because the delays, the internet delays are different for everybody. So,
I think there was a little bit of a confidence thing. I think if we just had a little more confidence, maybe.
yeah, you think so? I don't think the internet had anything to do with it. No, I've tried this several occasions, even with people who are very confident, and it was funny. I mean, but there are certain ways of thinking musically where this is an advantage. Like I'm going to do an exercise where we just like all try to sing notes together and mute and unmute and listen to what's happening in our headphones, and just try to really explore and examine that space and how and figure out and like find out what the experience is like for us and try to describe it to one another. I think personally, I think that's a really exciting opportunity. For a class where they're just trying to get through a scene, for instance, there's 3 or 4 actors and they're just trying to read lines together. And sometimes in acting, you want things to react very fast. They're going to have a different time of it. They're going to have to discover ways around that. I think it could be used as an opportunity. I think it could be used as an opportunity to explore different ways of actually even writing scenes. There's a lot of authorship courses where then they have to, they write their scenes and then they do them together as a group. And if the author is thinking about the fact that there is going to be this slight amount of lag, that could be a really interesting thing to play with, It could be used creatively. And that's a lot of times, that's what performing with technology is about. It's about figuring out what is the limitation of this thing and how do I allow that to make my performance into something unique, by going with it, not by trying to fight against it and make it do what I want it to do, but by just seeing what does it do. And let's see if I can find a creative way to make that actually something interesting.
Yeah.